So happy International Integrative Medicine Day to everyone, and happy Year of the Dragon. So we have a lot going on. This is the beginning of the Chinese New Year. My name is Virginia Cowan. I'm Director of Education for the Institute of Complementary and Alternative Medicine at the School of Health-Related Professions across the street here at UMDNJ. And I have been a yoga teacher for a long time. Longer than I've officially been a yoga teacher, and have a background in fitness and exercise, and I'm absolutely fascinated by all kinds of alternative therapies, but today we're here to talk about yoga. And I have assembled a wonderful group of panelists today. I'm just delighted everyone's here. I'm going to give you a real quick read of their bios. Those who are in the audience can read them on the back of their sheets. So first, I'm actually going to go all the way over to the other end and say Sarah Morton. And she first fell in love with movement as a dancer in Calgary, Canada. She discovered yoga while studying dance and theater in Southern California. She completed her teacher training at Yoga Works in Santa Monica, California with Maddie Esri and Lisa Walford, and became a Pilates instructor 2 years later. She's currently a group fitness director for Equinox Fitness Clubs in New York. She teaches classes and workshops around the country. And she's a spokesperson for ZOPA and also works with Morgan's Hotel Group, the Fresh Air Fund, UNICEF, and WonderWomen.org. And Equinox is, for those of you who don't know, is absolutely a national leader and one of the biggest players in group fitness here in the U.S. So next we have David Tao Halpin, and he began practicing yoga and Tai Chi at a studio in Maryland in 1997. He's obtained a whole lot of yoga certifications from various teachers, including Baron Baptiste and Dharma Mitra. And his students range in age from kindergarten to seniors, and they have varying levels of physical abilities and health conditions. He works at Sun Tao Yoga up in Wayne and gives demonstrations and lectures at area gyms, schools, and community centers. So welcome, Tao. And he had his own really wonderful journey that brought him to yoga, and maybe he'll get a chance to talk to us about that today. Next, we have Emma Magenta. And she grew up on a sheep farm in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And this is kind of far from a sheep farm. She attended Bryn Mawr College and later trained in acupuncture at the Eastern School of Acupuncture. She took her first teacher training with Anusara Yoga founder John Friend and walked away from a career in the internet business to follow her heart as a yoga teacher. She's also studied with Douglas Brooks, Paul Mueller-Ortega, and continues to study with John Friend. She now owns and operates South Mountain Yoga Studio in South Orange. And finally, we have Sonia Fernandez. She's our own, homegrown, here at UMDNJ, born and raised on Long Island, and she's been practicing yoga for 12 years and teaching for 7. When she was a student at Immaculata University in Pennsylvania, she started a yoga club and continued to teach during graduate school at Seton Hall. She finally completed her teacher training at Live Yoga Studio in Livingston in 2010, and she now teaches here at the YMCA on campus and teaches a multilingual class in Spanish, Portuguese, and English at the Ironbound Fitness Center. And she also teaches at Newark High Schools for the Newark Yoga Movement. So, having met our panelists, it's a wonderful, diverse group within the very diverse yoga community. So what I'm going to do is throw out some questions and see how it goes. And so my first question for anybody who wants to take it up is aerobics, kickboxing, spinning, calisthenics. Why yoga? What gives yoga staying power in your community?
I can speak to that maybe just because I'm also in a gym every day. But I have to say that, what people are finding maybe that are coming to yoga after spinning, after running, after doing all of these other things is that it actually makes their bodies feel better. So for instance, if you're only doing spinning or if you're only doing running and you're in hip flexion the whole time, you're actually almost in a worse place as far as, hip tension than someone who does absolutely nothing at all, right? So coming to yoga and, working on just opening your joints and becoming more flexible is actually going to make the other things feel better, as well as just kind of being in your own body.
You first. And then on a mental level and emotional level, it helps people calm and feel good about themselves and grow spiritually and feel peace.
And calisthenics doesn't do that.
It can. It can. Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things I think about all the time is how when you go to the gym, for example, most people, they put on their headphones or they watch the TV. Oftentimes there's loud music playing at the gym, and a lot of the experience at a gym is maybe not intentionally, but ends up taking people out of an identification or an experience of their own bodies. And one of the things that I think differentiates yoga from more conventional forms of exercise is that when you do a yoga practice, the entire experience is designed to take you into an experience of your body, so that instead of just kind of blanking out and watching Friends for during the length of your workout, you're actually paying attention to your own self, paying attention to your breath, paying attention to whatever feelings arise from you in your mind and your heart and in your body as you're doing your practice.
Can you hear me? I don't need to speak that close to it. I basically have very similar answers to everyone. All of my students that come to my class, a lot of them say, I went to Zumba and I had a really hard time. I could barely breathe. I'm so sore all over. I went to kickboxing. And I said, why don't you try just doing yoga for a couple weeks and building up your strength and your balance and your energy? And they do. And then they go back to Zumba and they said, oh my God, Zumba is so much easier after doing yoga. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't know how to build all of those components that they needed to. And another dynamic of it is a yoga experience in class is completely different from being in a spinning class or a Zumba, whereas, especially I take the time to get to know each one of my students, and I ask them their name and where they're from and how they're feeling. And I remember who they are and what they do and where they go to school, and I remember when they're not there. And I ask them, how have you been? It's been a long time. So I'm acknowledging them as a person. They are not just, it's not just another normal class. They are a person to me that I consider my child almost in a way. They are my children.
So you raise a good question, and that's actually the quality. Is it the quality of the teacher or is it the practice?
I think it's the quality of the teacher and the practice. And I will say that I think it's the quality of the teacher, the quality of the student, and what the practice is like. I think one of the difficulties that the sort of conventional medical establishment has had with yoga is that it's very hard to do a study of yoga, given the fact that different teachers emphasize different things, different teachers have different types of experience. I just think that's one of the things that makes it really hard to do a study like that. Certainly, I think also it depends on the student, because a good student will learn more from a less experienced teacher than a poor student will learn from a really, really good teacher. So, but that being said, you could be an excellent student and have an excellent teacher in, say, spin class, and you're not going to get the same thing from that you get from yoga. Yoga and spin are obviously totally different, and they offer different types of things.
And, students change, too. Is this on? Yeah, can you guys hear me? Okay. Students change, too. Like, I find that at Equinox, a lot of people might be, attracted, and not just in Equinox. I actually was attracted to yoga because of, the physicality of it, because of, the aspect of movement and really the more physical part. And that evolves, you can be attracted to that and then kind of find that you have all these benefits as you continue your practice that you didn't really expect or even look for. So, and I see that with my students, and I recognize the ones that come for that they're, originally maybe attracted to the workout or maybe the yoga body or, these things that are, in our market now. But then they realize, oh, this is the only hour and a half that my mind is still, that I'm not thinking backwards or forwards of where I have to be, and they're really, truly present in the moment. And, I find even with injuries, no matter what the injury is, someone will say to me, it didn't hurt the whole time I was practicing. And most of the time, it's just that element of being present, of actually being aware of what you're doing with your body the entire time. And, as Emma was saying, in a lot of other exercise, you're not aware of it. You're just doing it. You look at, the reading at the end, you see how many calories you burned, and you almost want to be less aware of it so you don't feel it, or, So it's interesting, the evolution of a student and maybe kind of observing what draws them to yoga initially and then what keeps them there, because the physical thing isn't going to keep them there forever.
Yeah, I think expanding on the first question, also yoga is available to everybody. So from kindergarten to senior, everybody can do, compared to Zumba or something like that. But also, like everybody's saying, yoga is so into yourself. So if you can take away the judgment, a good teacher, a bad teacher, and then just the students really into their practice, into their breath, into their movement, and into their, soul, and just experiencing it like a beautiful dance, and then no matter where you practice, you'll be fine.
So that's the evolution, and I'm just trying to remember who exactly said that, the evolution of a student. And so evolving, and yoga is a practice because it's something that only you can do. And so I'm kind of getting that. And actually, Tao, you spoke very eloquently when we spoke initially about your students and people who come to you. What kind of change do you see in them?
Well, I get the wide variety of students, and the changes, actually, we have a beautiful space, and as soon as they come in, they feel like already like away from the world a little bit and feel at peace right away. But I think it depends on the person. Some people are like into the physicality of it, and then they start to improve their health and feel better, and then they start to realize, oh, there's something a little more here, something a little deeper that I can grow or experience, like inner growth, not just the physical body. And then I don't know, it's very, there's so many things that you can get out of yoga, so you can take it in any aspect of your life, whether it's spiritual, physical, mental, emotional. But the important is take care of yourself and not hurt yourself, not push yourself too much.
And not push yourself. So what about the advent of yoga competitions, which could be coming? Does that honor traditions, or, and this is really for anybody, or does it not make sense?
Yoga competitions are already here.
I'll do it right now.
Yeah, in fact, isn't that the purpose of this meeting? To me, there's a difference between contortionism and yoga. And the thing to me that's different between contortionism and yoga, between like something that's like I don't know, when you went to the circus 50 years ago and you saw somebody put their leg behind their head or what have you, to me that's more contortionism. Whereas the thing that makes yoga, that might differentiate yoga from mere contortionism or from other forms of yoga, is again this idea that in a yoga practice you're actually engaging yourself. Now, say you're doing a competition, what might be happening is instead you're engaging the goal of whatever pose you're trying to do. Whereas the thing to me that makes yoga is the fact that you're engaging yourself, you're becoming more and more conscious of where the boundaries of your body actually are, rather than picking a kind of an arbitrary goal of, well, I want to be able to put both legs behind my head and then do a backflip. That to me is not if you are going to make a differentiation, to me that's one of the things that would differentiate yoga from something that would happen in a competitive environment, is that awareness of what you're actually doing in your body.
Yeah, I think in a very kind of simple break it down way, I mean, they're just totally two separate things. I don't see anything yogic about a competition. I mean, essentially, yoga is to kind of get rid of your ego and really just let that whole part go. In a competition, winning is the goal. No one, goes into yoga class and turns to the person next to them thinking, I'm going to beat you, Like, that's just, they're really separate things.
Demonstrations.
Yeah, but it's not competition. Demonstrations showing, what you should be doing in a safe, safe way. For there to be a prize for a pose doesn't seem yogic really at all to me.
Well, it's funny because demonstrations were really how yoga initially became introduced to the U.S., and a lot of that was contortionism. But I just have to ask a question because it always makes me curious. How can someone be really good at yoga? Students say this, I want to get really good at yoga. What does that mean? So you're smiling, Sonia.
My
What does it mean?
students say that to me all the time, especially my students that are in their 40s and 50s, and they're like, I want to look just like you. And I'm like, well, I'm half your age, and I guess you could if you keep practicing another 5-10 years, but that's not the goal. And I really do think that extreme competition is really harmful to yoga and will deter people, because they will see that person that can put their leg behind their head and think that's yoga. And if I can't do that, then I can't do yoga. And that is so harmful to the practice of yoga. We need to become more practical. Get down to the basics of it. That's not what it's about. Yoga is about the journey. It's not necessarily about the goal. And all the steps that you have to do every single day to get to that, that's so much more important. And then that one day, I say to my students, that one magical day, you'll be able to lift up into wheel. It was as if it was so easy and you couldn't even feel the weight of your body. And that one day will happen, but it's all the little steps that take you there.
Any other thoughts before we go on to the big next question?
Next question.
I think yoga is, when people think about yoga or see yoga, it's about the poses, but it's so much more than that. The ethical guidelines of yoga is not harming and, being honest, these type of things are the really daily practice, that you're trying to become a better person, trying to, share more love. So I think that's these more focused. That if you want to be a good student, good at yoga, then don't harm others.
So, and that's actually just the perfect segue to the next big question. And that was that yoga is attributed to ancient traditions from India and throughout Asia. How much of those traditions is present in yoga in your community now? And how much of that is currently what's practiced?
I think you can really seek out both. I mean, you can, I'm coming in from Manhattan, and I mean, you can find, classes where you are chanting. I mean, you have, Ashtanga studios that are very, very purist and don't really look to make fusion classes or hybrid classes. Or, you can find yoga for athletes, yoga for dancers, yoga for dudes. You have all these other classes. Seriously.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, all these hybrids. But I have to say that, regardless of the name of a class, I think as teachers, you really just kind of want as many people as possible to find yoga. So, and I've been into a lot of those classes, and I recognize almost everything as a yoga pose. So if it's going to be a different name for a class, so be it. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that, when essentially once you're in there, they're teaching a lot of the same stuff, and the end result is essentially the same. But you can find, in the city at least, I mean, you can find really all levels of that, I would say.
One of the things that I always find baffling and a little troubling is there are certain schools of yoga, like when you read in the paper, what have you, you'll read articles that talk about the true yoga or the traditional yoga or the classical yoga. And I find that baffling because really there's no such thing. Nobody has a corner on the yoga market. And yoga has always been an extremely eclectic tradition. And there are all sorts of different streams of thought in the practice of yoga. And while in my own practice of yoga, I practice a style of yoga called Anusara yoga, we trace the ideas that we think about all the way back to a very old text called the Rig Veda. Technically, it's not a text because people transmitted it by speaking rather than by writing it. But we trace our ideas all the way back to that, and yet I don't go into yoga thinking that I've got a handle on the true yoga or that the style of the yoga that I practice is the only authentic type of yoga. And I think that anytime somebody says something like that, I think they're confused about the truly eclectic nature of yoga. Do I think that's something that's like aqua yoga or what have you, that's the best representative of all these hundreds and hundreds of years of the practice of yoga? Perhaps not, but that doesn't mean that it has something of value to offer to the perhaps more casual student that's getting introduced to yoga through that particular discipline.
Okay, so the Eightfold Path outlined in the Yoga Sutras is very commonly quoted at yoga studios. And I'm curious if you think it violates church and state separation when you're talking about community yoga or public schools, or how you handle that.
Can you hear me? Oh, I turned it off. Okay. I do teach in public schools here at Newark, and it is quite challenging because when you introduce yoga into a public school system, it really cannot be a spiritual thing at all, or religious thing at all, because if you do, then they're going to think that you're trying to convert the children to a new religion. And some students will opt out because they've been told by their pastor or their parent that yoga is a religion and you can't practice yoga. So you have to be very, very careful. We don't get into it at all. The only thing I do at the end is we put our palms together and we say namaste. And I teach them that means I see the good in you and you see the good in me. We really can't teach unless you're going to a school that is so super, super accepting of that you could chant, but it's very difficult. And also at the YMCA where I teach, I don't think it would be so accepted to just start chanting a lot and doing kirtan. I don't think that is the space for it. I think there's a space for kirtan. There's a space for chanting, and I don't think it's necessarily at the YMCA. We do chant Om at the end, but I don't get into the Yoga Sutras. And maybe I will if they demand it. There's a demand for it, but I don't think it's the right space for it.
There are also a lot of, I remember my teachers when I was studying said, God can be a lot of things. God doesn't mean it's my God or your God. God can just be spirit, really, and I liked kind of that image of just something bigger, right? Just something bigger than you, something bigger than the individual. And, the divine doesn't have to be attached necessarily to any religion, just kind of this bigger whole. And you can teach it that way without actually, labeling it. Almost everyone, I think, wants to believe in something more than just, this is it.
Well, so if you think about runners talking about runner's high, is there a yoga high equivalent? Is that the spiritual experience that somebody can have in a yoga studio that's not necessarily religious?
Yeah, I think there's a definite yoga high. I mean, I don't know if you guys would agree, but you feel really different after practice, and that's what's so attractive to especially beginners. I mean, the first couple times I find that new people come to a yoga class, they're kind of blown. They feel really different afterwards, and they can't quite maybe put it into words or even describe it on paper what it is, but it keeps them coming back. And I've always really believed that in yoga, it's very, to me, it's a little more obvious, but any kind of intimate connection with yourself is going to make you feel really good. It's going to make you feel better in your own skin. And as teachers, I think that's what we try to do is have people leave feeling better than when they walked in.
I think it's more like instead of a yoga high, more of a yoga calm. So people, like, when they calm the mind, they can be more in tune with their inner self, and that's where they can feel the peace and the bliss. Sometimes students, the tears come out. It's not like emotional tears, but just some release. And then I don't know what happened, but I feel really good. Can I come back tomorrow?
I find this question interesting because when you read the Yoga Sutra and when you think about the particular 8 steps that are mentioned in the Yoga Sutra, there's no mention of God. The 8 steps that she's talking about in the question are these particular 8 steps that are involved. Well, technically there are 8 limbs. They're described as 8 limbs in the practice of yoga. And the first 2 are yama and niyama, which are ethical precepts to live your life by. Then the third one is asana. The fourth, which is like the physical yoga postures that we do. The fourth one is pranayama, which is breathing exercises. The fifth one is pratyahara, which is usually translated as withdrawal of the senses. Then dharana, I think, right? Dharana, which is about making a container of your focus. Dhyana, which is about streaming your awareness through the container of your focus. And then the final one is samadhi, which is often translated, it's kind of like it's kind of equivalent to the Buddhist idea of nirvana. And when you look at those, there's nothing in there about God. Like, there's nothing that said, like, certainly if you think about the gods of the Hindu pantheon, who are like Vishnu and Shiva and Kali and what have you, those guys aren't mentioned in the Yoga Sutra. So while I do think that even though yoga and that particular text that we're talking about, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, arises from the cultural matrix of Hinduism, that doesn't mean that it is expressive of the most devotional or religious aspects of the religious practice of Hinduism. So I personally think that while I totally agree with Sonia, like I've taught in gyms and in schools and at Wise, and you definitely have to be careful as a yoga teacher to avoid some of the more explicitly Hindu aspects of the practice of yoga. I also feel like you can go really deep in yoga without talking about God at all. Everybody from the smallest child to the oldest person understands the golden rule, right? We all know that to be good to somebody else, that's ethically a correct thing to do. And even when you talk about yama and niyama, which are ethical precepts, that's not those are universal concepts. That has nothing to do with whether you're Hindu or Christian or an atheist. Even an atheist can understand the idea that it's good to be compassionate. So I personally feel that you can offer yoga in these places without any reference to any religious ideas that could possibly be in conflict with somebody else's faith.
Well, and looking at yoga's roots, or the ancient roots of yoga, and that growing out of or being part of Hinduism, we tend to borrow more of the Buddhist concepts: contemplation, mindfulness, meditation. Do you feel that that's more accepted because we're eclectic in our approach and we like to beg and borrow, or does that fly better with your community?
Yeah, I don't think compassion belongs to the Buddhist people. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, yoga's, I think they call science of religious.
Often they call it that.
So but they view it as like a way to connect to, not by not labeling it the divine source, God, Jesus, whatever the figure you want to put on it, but it's like the oneness of all of creation, and through that you can experience bliss. And then once you experience the bliss, you need to release the attachment from the bliss. So otherwise you're stuck in that. So there's like they say five koshas, 5 bodies that we have: physical body, and our energy body, and the mind, the intellect, and then there's the bliss body. So the journey of yoga is to go through these, to experience the body fully, liberate the body, and liberate yourself from the mind, the intellect, and connect with the divine source of the bliss.
And I think what's really attractive to a lot of people about that is that it's never ending, right? Even as teachers, it's never ending. Physically, philosophy-wise, the readings, I mean, it's never ending. I mean, you could learn forever. And that's a really attractive part of it, especially to newer students. I always say, don't get so stuck on, mastering this one thing, because once you master that, there's going to be something else. And once you realize there's always something coming, it's actually very liberating. It's like, okay, great, I can do that, but this is going to be a constant. You're always moving forward. There's always going to be the next thing. And that's good. You should always be moving forward. You should never just kind of stop and feel like, I'm finished, I did it. So that's a little off topic, but kind of going on what he said.
It's kind of like a natural liberation. So just if you keep practicing diligently, so all the ego kind of fades away because, I really want to do that. I really want to do that. And finally you did it. Oh, there's another.
Now
so there's no beginning or end. So it's just an experience. So it doesn't matter if nobody's good or bad. They're just everybody practicing together, sharing something.
I kind of feel like the physical postures that we do in yoga are really just a gateway into learning more about these universal life qualities or virtues that we're all trying to embody. Really, the poses are just a gateway to a practice of compassion, or a practice of self-love, or a practice of one of the words we use is cleanliness, which is important, right? You gotta be tidy and clean in your personal life. So I think the poses themselves are just a gateway into that experience.
So, cleanliness, commodities. Let's talk about the $100 yoga pants and the $9,000 teacher trainings. And austerity and contentment are part of the yoga path. So, do teachers and teacher training programs have a responsibility, or is the cost just going to go up? Are we all priced out?
So define the responsibility.
To $9,000 teacher training programs, to market yoga paraphernalia that's very expensive, which makes it less accessible for people who don't have a lot of money. So,
yeah, I don't think a teacher should ever really be in the business of marketing anything. The $9,000 yoga teacher training and the $100 pants, I mean, it's a market. I mean, it's the society that we live in. But those are choices too. I mean, you can take a teacher training that's not $9,000. It's actually below $5,000. That's very good. You can buy $100 yoga pants, or you can go to H&M and buy $10 yoga pants. A lot of teachers wear those too. They're choices, and I think because it's so prevalent, yoga's become so prevalent in our community. Of course, clothing companies and every kind of company has kind of jumped on the boat. But the other options still exist, and they're choices. I still feel like at the end of the day.
So Sonia, in your community, the folks that you work with, is that off-putting to them to see that, or do they even see it?
I think most of my students don't even know about Yoga Journal, especially the ones in the Ironbound community. Portuguese, Brazilian, Spanish community don't even know about that. They just see me, and whatever yoga is, it's what I show them it is. And I tried to introduce a little bit of everything. I took them to the solstice yoga in Times Square, and they absolutely loved it. It was an amazing experience for them to be with like hundreds of other people and to be chanting Om. And they said that they felt something inside of them that they had never felt, that something was awakening inside of them. And it's so amazing to hear them say that. And I really don't buy into it. And sometimes I do feel bad. Well, I should be able to afford the $100 yoga pants. But then I'm thinking to myself, practically, I can't afford that. I teach 7 classes a week. That means that's $700 worth of yoga pants. I'm like, that's too much money. So it is. And the yoga teacher training, you want to go to the best yoga teacher training, but that is a lot. And if you're going to pay $9,000, well, then you're going to want students to pay $20 per class. So then it keeps just adding up, and it keeps adding up. And to the student that's never practiced yoga, doesn't know anything, they're never going to walk into a yoga studio and pay that. They really aren't. They're going to get introduced to yoga at a gym, at a YMCA. They're going to see somebody, be curious. They're going to see someone friendly like me, and they said, okay, maybe I'll try it. And then they'll practice, and then they'll invest.
I wear $100 yoga pants frequently. I wear them because the particular brand that I wear lasts a really long time and holds up in the washer really, really well. And I teach 8 classes a week, and it's better for me to spend $100 on yoga pants that I know I can wash and dry really effectively. But the other thing is that part of my job as a yoga teacher, I feel, is to inspire my students. And I've been teaching yoga now for over 10 years, and I'm 35 now, so I started when I was pretty young. And there have been times in my teaching career when I've showed up looking like a slob. And not to say that you can only not look like a slob by wearing really expensive clothes, right? That's not what I'm saying. But somebody recently told me a story about how they were talking about this woman. She was older, and her husband had passed away, and she decided to get certified to be a school teacher. And when she went in to teach her kids, she made up her mind that she was going to teach in an underprivileged high school. And when she went in to teach these kids, she would always wear her most beautiful high-end suits. And somebody said to her students once, well, how do you feel about the fact that you can't afford a new pair of sneakers, and this woman comes in and she's wearing this very expensive and beautiful outfit? And the students said it really shows us, they liked it, because they said it really shows us that she cares about us, because she wears her best clothing to come in and teach us. When I stand up in front of my students, I want to feel really good about myself, and I want to wear something that shows that I really cared enough to look nice for them. And some days for me, that means that I wear really expensive pants.
It is true. I mean, I'm sponsored by a clothing company, so I wear a lot of expensive clothes too. But when you're teaching and you work that much and you have to wash things as much as we do, you do notice the difference. I mean, the cheaper stuff does kind of fall apart, and for us, these are our it's rare that we wear clothes like this, right? I mean, we wear,
Yes.
Yeah. It's like really dressed up for us. So it's stuff that we wear every day. So I feel like it's.
So it's almost, though, for teachers, it's almost like that's your go-to-work suit.
It's like a
Totally.
uniform. It's like a uniform.
That's your $100 pair of
But
jeans.
I totally agree with what Sonia's saying too about for the average student, I don't expect them to I certainly would never want one of my students to look at my outfit and say to themselves, you know what, because I'm not looking like that, because I don't wear those clothes, or I can't afford that type of clothing, that means I shouldn't do yoga. And I think generally most of the students I know, they're not putting down $100 on a pair of pants. And thank God they don't have to. You can wear a pair of $10 pants from Target.
We're going to switch from wardrobe now, and we're going to talk about research. There's a wide variety of research out there. I've contributed to some of that on yoga, and there's an awful lot lately on disease-based outcomes. And so you're not researchers, but basically it's yoga for people with breast cancer, yoga for people with Parkinson's disease, yoga for multiple sclerosis. Does, as a teacher, is that useful to you, and or does that send a message that people should wait until they're sick to learn yoga?
I think it's really fascinating that, we're so, people go to see therapists, right? And we're very conscious of the fact that when you go through trauma, whatever you absorb during the day, it clearly manifests itself in your head, right? And so you have to find a way to talk that out, whether it's to your friends or to your mom or to your therapist. We all know that it makes sense to talk that out, so you're not just absorbing it and kind of going crazy. And I think a lot of yoga teachers, we believe that your body absorbs all of that too. That it has to actually be worked out of you, and your physical yoga practice is a very good way to do that. So, and I won't speak for everyone on the panel, but I really do believe that, what you go through and the trauma and whatever, sadness or pain or whatever it is that you go through does manifest itself physically in you as well as mentally, and both need to be addressed. So I think that, that's a really big argument, is that we have to be preventative. And we're not, in the Western world, we're really not. But that if you know that, you're going to have some kind of repercussion physically if you don't kind of take care of yourself, then disease, whatever it is going, injury even, on a lesser, and obviously it's not as serious, but those things will happen. Like you really have to start taking care of yourself at a much earlier just at a much earlier time than waiting for something to actually go wrong before you address it.
Yeah, I kind of researched on myself. So I fixed computers for about 15 years, and then they were huge back then. Actually, I'll be 50 next year, so a little older than but anyway. So then I got out of the field, started doing construction, and I didn't take care of myself. I ended up trashing all the tendons in my arm and looking for a way to heal this and then take care of this. I tried cortisone, electric shock. Anyway, I couldn't use my arm for 3 years. Stayed with my brother, went back to school, found yoga, and then after 2 months, wow, this works again. So that's how I got into where I'm at. So I think I kind of grew up like a sickly kid, and I always had in my head, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick. And then after 10 years of yoga, I still had that in my head, and then I realized I'm not sick anymore. And then something snapped, because every time I got a little sick, I'd tell everybody I'm sick, and trying to get energy, I think, maybe, I don't know. So then something I got out of that mindset, I'm not sick anymore. And then, so I think there's a lot to health. You can't just put, yoga's it, or this is it, or that's it. But it's mental, it's emotional, it's environmental, it's how we think. So I think it's a bigger picture to health than just this pill is it or that practice is it. So.
Did I hear you say that you'll be 50 next year?
Yeah.
50 next year.
Wow.
Good, Tao.
My before yoga picture is 10 years older than now.
And we won't give you the name of his plastic surgeon.
I always say that yoga is a fountain of youth, and it really, really is. And I think we all are, and Tao definitely is a representation of that.
I'm not telling you how old I am. But okay, so now let's talk about scope of practice for yoga teachers. So students might come to you for counseling and advice, or massage, or prescribing herbal remedies, or dietary advice. Is there a defined scope of practice, and do you think it's important?
I wanted to go back a little about the injuries and people coming up to you and all
That's
that
part of
whole,
it.
Yeah, the whole part of it. Because I have so many students that come up to me and say, my doctor told me to do yoga. I have scoliosis, or I have sciatica, or I'm in remission from breast cancer. I have high blood pressure, I have high cholesterol, I have high diabetes. I get a little bit of all of it. And I'm just so fascinated, so happy that all of them are coming to me, saying to me that their doctor told them to come do yoga. Yeah. And after practicing on a regular basis, The students that I've seen from last year on a regular basis, they have all improved dramatically. They've all lowered their blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. I've seen amazing things. The students that I've had that are suffering from mental illnesses, I've seen a dramatic change in them. From someone that was insecure, didn't like herself, that was just so sad, you could just tell, it was just so sad looking at her, to someone that is vibrant and laughing and smiles and didn't know how to before. Dramatic change, and it's all for yoga. Yoga can help, I think, really everyone in their own illness or everything that they're going through. So it's really important. And advising them.
Yes, I was going to say, now advising them, so they come to you and they say, I have XYZ, whatever, can you rub my neck, what should I eat?
Right, I'll show them, when I show them is, I do rub their neck here once in a while.
Okay, well, massage is not yet fully
Yeah,
licensed in New
yes.
Jersey, we're dealing with that, but.
If they tell me that they have neck pain, then I tell them, well, how do you sit when you're in a chair? How do you stand? Can you do little neck stretches? And I'll show them what to do when they're sitting down. Or their wrists hurt, so I'll show them wrist stretches. Or their back hurts, so I'll show them stretches against the wall that they can do throughout the day. And I tell them what you do throughout the day is going to dictate how you're going to feel at the end of the day. And you need to treat your body well. And I teach them also about how to sleep well and how you sleep in bed and the positioning. And if you're all over the place, you're going to wake up and everything's going to hurt. But if you could put a pillow underneath your knees to support your back, if you can have a pillow that will support the curvature in your cervical spine, you won't wake up with so much pain. So I do advise little things, though I don't get into that many dietary suggestions, no.
Yeah, I personally, I'm very clear about what the scope of my practice is as a yoga teacher. Probably, I think, because I was trained in acupuncture as well. I'm very clear that I have a certain area of expertise and that it is not giving nutritional advice, even though, like every other human being under the sun, I have my own ideas about nutrition. And I certainly am very picky about what I eat, but I just feel like I'm not trained as a nutritionist. And I'm also, I'm somewhat conscious of the legal implications of doing that, and I'm somewhat conscious of the ethical implications of doing that, which is to say, like, if somebody has a physical problem, I'll offer them what I think might help them, but ultimately, sometimes people need to see a doctor.
See a doctor, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think the boundary really, it's one thing to ask someone, what do you eat? It's something maybe small, but I think really the boundary issue with students can be when you notice they're coming to you for everything, what do you eat, or what do you, and it's just, you have to remember as a teacher that you're not really, you don't want your student to become attached to you, right? You want them to be more attached to themselves. And, as teachers, well, you see it sometimes. As teachers, sometimes you can get a sense of someone maybe starting to perform for you, starting to, can you see this? Can you, and they're really they're getting attached to you more so than kind of turning this into their own practice. And so to me, that's really, good advice is good advice. Same thing. I don't give a lot of nutritional advice. I mean, if I can help them with something physical, I will. But I'm more aware of just kind of the personal boundary that you have with a student, and that there really has to be you want there to be a line there, so that they're not really so attached to you, but you're just kind of this vessel, and they become more attached to their practice and their own experience. The same thing could happen to any type of teacher, I'm sure.
But I think on the other side, we can also introduce people to different modalities, even though I'm not certified nutritionist. I've experienced like cleansing and fasting type things that have profound effects on the body. So of course I check with your doctor, make sure it's okay. But if you try this, maybe it'll help you. You can research and all. We do fasting and cleansing type programs, and it helps people tremendously. I had this one woman, 17 years, every time she ate, she had pain. She cleansed and gone. And blood pressure, all kinds of diabetes, all kinds of things. So I don't know, I think as a yoga teacher, it's kind of a strong word. So also I feel I'm a student, and the students I feel are my teacher. So the relationship's more like friendship and sharing, and if they have a good idea to introduce to me, I can look into it, and if I decide to do that. But of course, I'm not a doctor or a nutritionist, or sleep professional.
Sleep professional, right. So pretty much probably our last question, and that involves some states are trying to license yoga teacher training programs as vocational organizations or vocational institutions. And in New York, the teachers fought back, and in some states they have successfully fought back and said, we're not training people to teach or do anything, we're just training people, and it's a spiritual pursuit. And so does our community or the community that you teach in need well-trained teachers that have strong educational goals and a framework, or do you think that yoga could be well served by having more people teaching with less standards?
I think this is a very timely and important question for the yoga community. Certainly when I look out at the world of yoga and I think about like sometimes students will come to me, they've done other styles of yoga with say they took some classes with a teacher who received a weekend certification in yoga, and then they took some classes from that person and they got hurt. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I've done all this training in my life to get to the point where I teach people, and other people can go and do a weekend certification and they're called a yoga teacher and they can teach students and they can talk students into positions or into ways of doing things that hurt them. That being said, the thing that makes me uncomfortable though about the idea of having some kind of legislative body or whatever come up with the standards of what it means to be a yoga teacher, that really bothers me because I don't know who those people are that are coming up with the standards. And the thing is, especially in the style of yoga that I practice, we have a very particular idea of how to do things. That's what makes it a style. If you're going to do a style, you have a particular idea of the way that things should be done. And I'm just not comfortable with the idea of a lawmaker making a bunch of determinations about how yoga should be, how my yoga should be taught and practiced, how people should be trained to do it. So I think that's really the sort of sticky wicket in this whole situation right now in yoga, and I don't know how it's going to resolve.
But I think where does it end? I mean, what about the dance instructor school or the golf instructor school? Do they have to get legislation for that as well? Or?
Well, and that is a good point, because in New Jersey they've had a law on the proposed law for I think 3 years running now for group fitness instructors, and yoga teachers were part of that. And at some point a couple of years ago, yoga, Pilates, and martial arts were exempt, but there's still this proposal that there should be some kind of standard for fitness instructors who teach in fitness facilities. And so you raise a good point, because at what point does it stop being yoga and is it dance, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's, and every one of us here comes from a different background. Every teacher training you do is probably influenced or favors something different. And then once you do that teacher training as a teacher, then you start to add your own stuff to your style. Maybe for me it's my dance background, maybe for someone else it's, the poetry that they read. So it's, you have all these different teacher trainings, and then on top of that, you have what makes each teacher individual and special and attractive. So for as much as we worry about, people not having enough anatomy training or, science training, it is a pretty nerve-wracking to think that you'd want to someone could put, standards on this whole thing. I don't know how it could be done, really. It's scary because the people doing it are not yoga, that would be doing it aren't yoga teachers.
I feel like it could really choke the life out of yoga. The other thing is that a lot of, I think part of why legislators are interested in the idea of legislating yoga in some ways because of the injuries that crop up, right? But I think the other thing is that once you legislate it, then it creates an income for whatever. And I personally kind of am of the opinion that that's probably the main reason why they're interested in that. Which brings me to another topic, which is the fact that I think part of why yoga is an attractive thing to legislate is because when you look at the paper, the number that gets tossed around a lot is the idea that yoga is a $6 billion industry, and yet most of the people that I know who would end up paying the bill if it was legislated are not the people that are making those $6 billion. Like the average yoga teacher in your local Y or what have you is not making a lot of money from it at all, barely making a wage. In fact, me and Sarah at the beginning were talking about how a lot of yoga teachers don't have health insurance. You don't make a lot of money doing yoga, and I feel like if it was legislated, then the burden of paying for that legislation would probably fall on people who already are doing yoga for love and don't make a lot of money and don't have health insurance. So I feel like it's a very complicated issue.
I kind of see the other side of it, where if it was legislated and there were certain requirements you needed to have to be a yoga instructor, then it could become more of the mainstream healthcare industry. And you could be considered sort of like a physical therapist. And you would be paid by the health insurance company because your doctor would refer you to a yoga instructor. And you would generate more income for yoga instructors and more professional licensed yoga instructors. I see it going more mainstream.
But the thing that I have a problem with that is that almost like my mom's a doctor, and every doctor I know right now says that they feel like they are handcuffed from giving the best care that they possibly could by the insurance system and the health system. So I feel like I'm sure there's some way out of this, but I cannot particularly see it myself.
Okay, so thank you all for such a stimulating discussion. I have a few more people to thank before we wind up the panel. Ian Whitehead, the director of the New Jersey Medical School Cancer Center, for donating this space. Thank you so much. Diane Wheeler, also of NJMS Cancer Center, for helping us arrange everything. And Gwen Mahone, Associate Dean of the School of Health-Related Professions. That's my home. She worked her magic to help us put this whole thing together. Jill Reichman, the Interim Director of Primary Care, where we live in our Institute for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, has been wonderfully supportive. Matt Rosenthal for videotaping and his team for all the technology. George Harriton for catering. We have little snibbles outside for you all. And then Candace Cronin and Margaret Rogers of ICAM for administrative support and enthusiasm. So happy International Integrative Medicine Day, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.